Okay, I think the room is as full as it's going to get. So the name of this talk, as you can see on the screen, is Lessons Learned in Building Data Aggregators. I know, the sexiest topic you've ever heard in this entire conference, right? I mean, data aggregators, what could be more exciting than that? I'm sure it gets you going every morning. Probably not the best thing ever, but we're trying to make it, interesting, fun, hopefully. You'll take some tidbits and tips and ideas after the end of the talk. So my name is Xabier. I'm a senior backend engineer at Revolut. I've been with the company for about 2.5 years, more or less. But I've been around a lot longer than that. So I've been a software engineer for nearly 20 years now. So I've done a few things during my career. I've worked on everything from advertising to banking to video games, startups, you name it. Before we really get into the talk, I'd like to mention basically just one fun fact about me, which is my first visit to Porto was by mistake, because I was meant to talk in a conference in Lisbon, but somehow I managed to book the wrong flight. Ended up in Porto, and then I had to catch a train from Porto to Lisbon on the very same day. So, I mean, lucky chance, and as luck would have it, this is my third or fourth time already in Porto, so glad to be back. Now, moving on to the agenda for this talk, as you can see, we're going to touch a few topics. We're going to talk about the onboarding process that Revolut businesses follow, because that's the team I belong to, business onboarding. And we're going to talk about integrations with third parties. We're going to be talking about dealing with the multiple data models that all these third parties actually have and what it means for us when it comes to integrating with them. We're going to talk about how we evaluate the data that we get from those third parties and what we do with it, and the decisions and assessments that we need to make to ensure that we are using the right data provider. And last but not least, we're going to talk about pricing models. What do I mean by pricing models? I'm talking about the pricing models of the third parties they are going to integrate with, because believe it or not, they're going to play a massive role on how you evaluate and how you architect your integration platform with those third parties. Moving on, I'm going to first talk about a little bit about the process of the Revolut onboarding process for businesses, right? So right now, Revolut operates in over 11 jurisdictions, which each of them basically have their own regulations, their own laws, and their own pretty much everything that you can think of. So we need, in Revolut, being a bank, needs to comply with every single one of them. So far, we've onboarded about, I think we're already on 400,000, probably need to update that slide, businesses per year, but our mission is to get to 1 million businesses onboarded per year, which is quite ambitious because, as you may not know, I don't know if any of you have your own businesses or you have started your own companies here. I'm sure that some of you do. And you might have noticed that the process of opening a bank account, business bank account with any bank is as painless as having your teeth removed, more or less. So the process usually takes about several weeks. You are asked to provide tons of information, lots of documents. It's a constant back and forth with the bank. You take some documents, they tell you they're wrong, you go back, you request some more, you come back later, a few weeks, then bim, pam, pum, you need a month and a half, sometimes even longer than that, to actually get it going. And Revolut's mission is do this process, at least my team's mission, but also Revolut's mission, is to get this process done as quickly as we possibly can. So far, I think our best record to date is under 6 minutes. So from somebody beginning the process of onboarding a business to actually having the account activated and then being able to operate with it under 6 minutes, which I would say is pretty good. admittedly, this is the simplest and easiest case, which is when a business has like a single owner. But still, I think it's a feat worth mentioning. In order to be able to onboard a business, we need to fetch information from multiple data sources. So far, our team is dealing with 7 different data sources, but this is growing. This quarter, I haven't updated this slide, unfortunately, but this quarter, we've already added another 2, and next quarter, so by the end of the year, we'll add another 2 as well. So beginning of next year, we'll be looking at 11 or 12 different services that we had to integrate with. Why do we need to do this? We need to do this to keep our customers safe, because we need to comply with all the safety and regulations that each government imposes on any bank that wishes to operate within their borders. And because we need to keep our customers safe in terms of ensuring that we treat their data with the respect that it needs and with the care that it needs. If any of you have heard of GDPR here, I'm sure you have. Well, that's a big one. So, next up on the docket, different data providers, different integrations. What does this mean? So, I'm sure many of you have integrated with third-party services left and right. It's kind of your bread and butter of every day. So, at Revolut, we've encountered several types of integrations with third parties. So, one, synchronous, which is the one that everybody knows. You call it, you get something back, done. Asynchronous, you call it, you will get something back at some point, maybe, if you're lucky. You don't know, you hope. So for this kind of integrations, synchronous ones, you either have to poll or you get a callback most of the times. That's the callback is usually the approach that we've taken at Revolut for the most part. Then we've encountered another 2 interesting ones. Hybrid, which is the one I personally hate the most, because it's the neither here nor there one. What does this mean? This means that it's an API that essentially when you call it, you get something back. And that something can be what you want, or a message telling you, hey, I'll give it to you later. Maybe. And a streaming API, which is, I mean, it's fairly uncommon. It would be nice if we had more of those, but we've encountered only one instance of a streaming API where we actually have to connect to a stream of data. It's kind of sort of like an RSS feed, but for information about businesses and companies. Now, next on the list, right, when you're integrating with a third-party service, what is it? This is the format, right? So this one's fairly simple, right? You got your standard JSON stuff. Everybody knows JSON, right? Anyone here that doesn't know JSON? No? Okay, good. CSV, which is far more common than you would believe these days. We have been, unfortunately, surprised by the amount of third parties that still send you data in either CSV format, or they just give you a file at some point somewhere for you to download and consume. And then SOAP, which is unfortunately still out there, and it's a bit of a pain in the ass to deal with. I see a lot of heads going up and down when SOAP, yes, we share the pain. Now, the last part of integrating with different partners is usually authorization, authentication, and verification. At Revolut, we've encountered quite a few of these things. Like, in terms of authorization, we've had everything from like shared TLS certificates, JWT tokens, a zip file with a password on it, and just API tokens, and in general, which is the most used, funny enough, basically username and password. It's a shared one between both services. When they call you, they provide you with the username and a password, and you just verify that it's them. They're allowed to call you back. And verification, unfortunately, is one thing that we have encountered many third-party services are lacking. So no digest messages and no real way of verifying that the contents of the message that you just received in the callback hasn't actually been tampered with, which it's sad when it comes to financial services, but unfortunately many still don't do that. And the last thing to consider when it comes to these third parties, is the uptime, the graceful degradation, and time to recovery. So uptime, how many times do you integrate with a third-party API, and they're not there? They haven't told anyone. They're just not responding all of a sudden, and you start looking at your charts and okay, why are we getting 500s in our service? What's going on here? Why is it timing out? And then you call them and like, oh yes, maybe we do have a problem. Thank you for letting us know. Graceful degradation, I guess everyone knows about this more or less. So this means that as you push your third party more and more to get more and more data, they are at least able to potentially slow you down, letting you know that you are requesting too much, too fast, and that's okay. But oftentimes, graceful degradation isn't even an option in most of third parties, so you need to account for that when building your integration. Time to recovery, this one is important. So we had a case, for example, with a third party of a third party, which is another way of integrating. So, for example, we integrated with a company in the US to fetch data for US customers, but unfortunately, they have to integrate with the IRS as well in order to fetch us some of the information that we utilize. And of course, when the IRS is down, they cannot give you any data. So there's nothing you can do. Fortunately, this API actually lets us know that the IRS is down, when it's down, and then there's a web page that you can check to, F5, see if they're up or not. Not a lot that you can do, but if the service provides this kind of responses, they're very useful. And alerting. But alerting is kind of fairly simple. You know that you're calling a third party. You need to know when they're down and act, if you can. Now, with different third parties, we have to talk about different data models. Why is this important? So the first thing that we've realized at Revolut is that the best thing that you can do is build your own model. What do we mean by this? So for example, when we fetch data for a new business that is being onboarded, we have our own data model that represents our worldview of the data that we need to onboard that business. This is not tied to any of the third parties. It's our own internal data model. And what we do is we map everything that the third parties give us to this model of ours. Now, this serves the purpose of modeling our business needs, what we need to extract in order to validate the business. But also, it helps us a lot to standardize the process. What do I mean? Once you have a model, you know exactly the information that you need to extract from each of them, which means that you can have a standard set of APIs that you can fill in and replicate for each of your different providers, which simplifies the process of adding a new data aggregator, at least when it comes to the parsing part, to the parsing of the payload back. And oftentimes, what tends to happen is that of all the data that your provider gives you, you don't really need everything. You find some of the information that is useful to you. There's the one that's critical to you. You always try to extract. But there's some information that if you can have, that's great. But if you can't have it, then, well, it's not a problem. For that, optional is your friend. So essentially, whenever we integrate with third parties, 99% of the properties that we build in our model are optional. Moving on to the format. And this one is a funny one, I think, because everyone has had to deal with this stuff so much and so often, it's almost comical. So numeric values. Who's had to deal with numbers and points and decimal points and commas? And with the fact that some countries use the commas to separate the decimal part, and some countries use dot to do that. And some countries don't even do that because they use two separate fields for that, because why make things easy? Or with currencies, right? So Revolut as a bank has to deal with currencies constantly, so that means that we need to be able to extract the currency that a business operates with, which might come as a symbol or a three-letter code, or not at all, because, you are calling a service that's, I don't know, based in Hungary, so why wouldn't they work in liras, right? I don't know, it's a business. It's a Hungarian business. They need to work in their liras. or not. Who knows? Dates and timestamps. So here, this is like the playground of data parsing. I mean, ISO 8601, right? Everyone? Anyone? No? You haven't had fun with that yet? If you haven't, you will. I promise. As you probably know already, we need to store the data in UTF standard time and ISO notation. Depends on also how your database is structured. So in our case, for example, Revolut stores timestamps as longs constantly, but it's always UTC based. And we follow then the ISO standard when outputting the information. And last but not least, names and addresses, because Ramon with an accent at the end is not the same as Ramon without an accent at the end. And as a country that has non-English characters, like Portugal, right? I'm sure that you know about that. And when you integrate with third-party services that seem to think that everything, the world is in English for everything, everywhere, including names, it gets a little bit funny when you need to validate whether Ramon with an accent is the same as the Ramon that's trying to onboard their business, which usually is. One of the things that we've actually started to do a lot of the times when it comes to evaluating different names is using the Leverstein distance between words to kind of get an idea of how similar or different the word is. And if it's similar enough, well, then we usually might go like, yep, looks like it's the same. And last, meaning is everything. So I'm pretty sure that some of you have seen Princess Bride, and you know what Inigo Montoya says, you know. I don't think that means what you think it means. And this is usually the case oftentimes, and it's something that you need to be very careful with third parties. Why? Because this only works if your third party and yourself understand the same ideas and share the same meaning for the same data. And I'm going to give you an example of a recent problem that we actually had. So we integrated with an Italian data source in order to make sure that whenever a business was declared insolvent, we would lock the account and prevent them from withdrawing or moving any money out of it. But we had a problem. It happens that what our third party understood as insolvent meant that the courts had only had started the proceedings to declare insolvency. But in technical terms, the company had not been declared insolvent yet. It's not until the ruling gets out that the company is officially insolvent. But our third party will tell us differently. They would tell us the very moment that the court proceedings started, they would tell us that the company was insolvent. And as you can imagine, this can cause a lot of drama, especially for a business that is trying to possibly survive. All of a sudden, they get locked out of all their accounts. They cannot move any money. They cannot receive money. They cannot send money. They cannot make payroll. They cannot do anything because the bank is legally obligated to lock their account. But if your third party doesn't understand the same thing as you do, you have a problem. So this part is critical and is often overlooked. Moving on, the next part is about how good the data is, how the data that we get from a third party is, right? So at Revolut, we have settled for doing a qualitative and quantitative assessment of the data of a third party whenever we decide to integrate with a third party. Because the fact that there is a third party doesn't mean you have to integrate with them. I mean, sometimes you have no choice because they are the only choice, unfortunately. But if you can, we need to measure how accurate is the data you are receiving. So let's say that is the name of the incorporated business. Is it the same as the one that you usually get from your clients? If oftentimes that is not the case, then this data provider is rubbish to you because they cannot provide you with accurate information. The next thing that you need to verify is any information inferred by your third party. I'll give you an example. When it comes to registering a business, there are oftentimes smaller offices in towns that are not completely, into the digital age, which means that the applicant to incorporate a business will probably fill in a bunch of paperwork, and there will be at some point a clerk, that piles up all the documents, and at some point will start the process of digitizing that or inputting it into some website or other kind of government repository. So the data the business is incorporated is officially the data that they filled in the paperwork. However, your data provider could potentially decide that the date they incorporated is the date that the data was inputted into their platform, which is not necessarily correct. And basically, the third part is how reliable the information flow is. And what do I mean by how reliable? What I mean is, can you actually rely on the data that you are getting from your provider? As in, is the data accurate enough? Is the data, do you have any data that is inferred? Or can you basically, if you have like 3 different data providers that give you exactly or similar information, where would you rank them in the scale of reliability of the information? And then the next assessment that we do is the quantitative one. So do each of the providers that you use give you all the information, or do you actually need to build up something based on multiple data sources? This is something that happens not all the time, but it's happened quite a few times at Revolut, where the data that we get from one of the providers is actually incomplete. Or we have decided that the data that we get from another data provider is more accurate, oftentimes, or more complete, so we request data from both and we merge. Well, this kind of answers itself, right? So can we combine different data providers? Last but not least, we're going to get into the pricing model. This part, I think, is the most impactful, even though it may not seem like that at the very beginning. So you have to understand that the data providers that you have likely modeled their solutions based on 2 key factors. Usually integration or with other parties, so how easy or difficult it is, or they make it for other people to integrate with them, but also making money, because those are businesses, let's not forget about that, and they want to make money out of your requests, out of your need. At Revolut, we've actually found 4 different types of pricing models that impact severely how we build our solution. So the first one is the flat rate per unit of time, which basically means you get a flat rate for, let's say you pay, I don't know, $100 a month, and you can make as many requests as you can. This is the easiest one by far, so you don't care really about anything. You're not going to pay the same thing whether you do 100 requests or 100 million. Fine. This is not very common because it doesn't lead to them making more money. Now, the second one that we have found out very often is the flat cost per request. So they charge you per request. The more requests that you make, the more money you pay. At Revolut, we had an instance where we actually had $500,000 bills for 1 month worth of requests because, for example, we had a job that went rogue and started to file requests at this third party, and we only found out when the bill came, which is not great, especially not for the engineers, which were all of a sudden called into a meeting with some people almost screaming, saying, "Why on earth did we get $500,000 in this bill?" The solution to this is the easiest one, is aggressively cache all the results, set up a timer for each request and the payload that you get back, and reuse the data on every request as much as you possibly can, and try to refresh it on a per third-party case, basically, because each of them will require different types of timing. The third time, and this one is a bit weird, but we've only encountered it twice. Per unique identifier, this has a different problem. The way they charge is that you first need to do a search on their service with the data of the business that you're interested in, and then you get a unique identifier for that, which is an identifier in their system, and then you need to use that identifier to fetch the data for that business. Not many third parties we've encountered with this kind of solution, but this proves to be quite painful. So the way that we've gotten around this is by ensuring that whenever we make a request to find the business in the third party. We use the amount of information that will make sure that we get one single result, so that we know that that's likely to be the one that we need to request information for. The problem obviously starts when you get like 150 different businesses with the same IDs. Then that poses another problem. We cannot send requests to this third party until we have collected the information that we think is necessary to ensure that we're going to get one result back. As well as with the previous solution, caching also helps a lot with this. The fourth solution that we have found when it comes to pricing models is based on data access. So depending on the business depending on the information about the business that you wish to access, you get charged differently. So if you want to access what they call, like, I don't know, level 0 information, which is the most basic info, they'll charge you a rate. If you want to access information on another level, they'll charge you more money, and so on and so forth. So with these, the solution requires that you know exactly the information that you need to access and request absolutely no more than that. Otherwise, you'll get into trouble because your bill will go up like a balloon. So I've talked a lot about all the things that we've encountered at Revolut, but what do we do? So I'm going to show you a little bit of code. Unfortunately, I cannot show you more for obvious reasons. It's a bank after all. So this represents, for example, the class that contains all the information that we source from third parties. It has an identifier for the third party, the source, because we need to know what third party it came from. Another class called business information. As you can imagine, that's where all the data goes. A collection of associates, because associates are almost like a separate piece, if you want to, when it comes to businesses. And this is data that is usually requested separately on top of the business. And we also store the raw response. Why? Because we cache aggressively all these requests. So every single time that we get a response back, it gets cached. And the cache gets refreshed on a configuration that's specific to every third party, because we've decided that the refresh rate of that third party may not, like, we have 7 right now, or 9 rather, by the end of this quarter, and each of them has different time schedules. So some of them refresh every day, some of them like every 2 days, some of them every week. So we need to be able to decide accurately when to clear the cache for that. I don't know if you can read these. It's a little bit convoluted, but this is the interface that we built for all our external data source clients. So we have we have several implementations. So the interface is called Companies Register Client. So all clients implement this interface. And then we have, here I'm just showing a few of them, Companies House, Credit Safe, Dun & Bradstreet, DNB, Infograph, and IMPI. We have more, and as the company grows, as the bank grows, we add more and more implementations of this. This is where the part that I talked about earlier kicks in. When you have your own model, you can standardize things behind an interface, and it makes the implementation a lot easier. Then we settle for a, probably here, everybody has heard about the decorator pattern, which is a classic one. So we basically have decorators for each of the things that we want to configure our different clients with. We have the caching, company register client, which is a decorator that ensures that the cache is hit first, and if it's not there, it's stored. We have, well, the dummy one, well, we all need to test sometimes. The exception handling companies register client, that's the decorator that all of them use, because we need to be able to catch exceptions on them and report them. And that's the one that's responsible for that. We have the serialized execution companies register client, which is a decorator that is in charge of allowing us to serialize requests to one or more data sources. There are instances where we actually need the data from one source to call another source. So the call has to be executed serially. We need to first execute one and then the other. There are instances where we actually prefer the data from one of the providers. So they are configured to first request from one, and if it's not present on that one, then we call the second one or the third one. And the time bounding company's register client, that is something that we set up in place in order to make sure that we don't call, even if we, and sometimes even if we don't have the response cached, there is a rate that we try not to exceed per service, per third party. And this is a fail-safe in case it looks like we're about to get another $500,000 bill. Yeah, sorry, I just forgot about this one. I added the names there, so in case that you are interested in seeing them a bit bigger. And so, now what? Well, the takeaways, I would say. Data models and pricing, I think, will be more influential in how you design that you think, right? Because as I mentioned earlier, you might need caching, you might need to serialize the requests, you might need to do a lot of things that are exclusively based on how the third party is pricing your requests. Some forms of integration are quite time-consuming. We have found cases where in the event that we had like 3 or 4 options to integrate with a third party, we actually went with the one that was easiest to integrate with. So I'll give you a fairly easy example. If you have one that gives you a nice and easy, Swagger documentation-based JSON API, and you have a SOAP one, well, I think we all know which one you're going to pick. So sometimes that's a lot easier than just suffering through it. Giving data quality and reliability the importance they reserve, especially for companies and businesses whose entire business model depends on getting or gathering data from other sources. And, well, this one is kind of the easiest takeaway. Caching is a must for efficiency in full technical and financial in terms of not spending what you don't have in calls to a third party. And with this, I think it's nearly over. Any questions?